I'm delighted to be joined now by Adriano Vlad-Starrabba, the co-founder of Prometheux, Douglas Brion, founder of Matta AI, and Tommy Stadlen, the co-founder of Giant Ventures. We were talking this morning about the lack in Europe of transformative AI technologies and the fact that B2B SaaS kind of crowds out the scene slightly. These founders and other portfolio companies of Tommy's are so transformative that I actually feel a bit nervous trying to even describe how the models work and what they do. So I'm going to put that over to you guys and ask you to explain a little bit more about your products.
Absolutely. Yeah, Adriano, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm Adriano, and at Prometheux, we build the future of the data foundation layer for humans and AI to access fragmented datasets in enterprise. So we have seen in 2024 how everyone has tried to throw large language models at basically every sort of application. And what we try and solve is allowing these companies to create a knowledge graph of all these different fragmented data sources in such a way that they can access it faster, better, and kind of empower Gen AI application for trustworthy artificial intelligence.
Douglas.
Cool. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Doug, and thanks for the intro. Yeah, at Matta, we're creating industrial AI for factory sentience. We love manufacturing. What does that actually mean? Well, we take normally computer vision models, so cameras, which we can install into any manufacturing process. So strap a camera on your line, whether you're building something or in a machine, and it sits there for a couple of days and effectively learns what good looks like. So it'll just learn to remember what good looks like, and then does smart spot the difference to detect when something goes wrong, and it can highlight that to you, and you can then prompt what kind of errors or defects you're after to detect. And then the super cool next step, where we released the first model at the end of last year, is then getting into causality. So we can then say, yo, we think something's gone wrong in your manufacturing process. It was caused by it being too hot. We recommend turning the temperature down in order to fix it. And if you're very ballsy, we can turn the temperature down for you and solve the problem on the fly. But no, it's good fun.
Tommy, tell us a bit about your investment thesis when it comes to AI.
Sure. So I co-founded Giant Ventures, multi-stage venture firm. We back companies that matter, like these guys' companies. We invest in entrepreneurs who are using technology to go solve big global challenges: climate, health, economic mobility, all increasingly powered by applied AI. So we're less interested in sort of backing the next sort of LLM. We're more interested in backing entrepreneurs who are using AI to go solve really specific problems, like both of these founders are. And yeah, we're all former founders who set up the firm in 2019 because 92% of European VCs had never worked in a startup. That's still the case today, and we thought that was crazy.
We've got a nice balance or conflict, however you want to put it, of hardware versus software here. So I'm going to actually really tease that apart.
Perfect.
In terms of looking at barriers to scaling for AI, that's something that keeps people very skeptical at the moment, particularly in Europe. Which obstacles have you guys faced most, and how are they kind of hardware or software specific? The ones I would anticipate might be, hardware supply chains or ethical black box thinking. Does this reflect your experience, or?
Yeah, I would say the most important obstacle in Europe, it could be for startups. It is in our case, I would say, customer speed. So the speed of actually onboarding new customers from scratch. Well, we see, for example, in the United States or in other countries, that customers are actually more open to work with smaller enterprises and startups right away. While in Europe, there is definitely an incredible interest, but it just might take a little bit longer because of all the regulations and processes. So yeah, I think as a focus for European kind of startup founders, there is a need to try and speed up the process, taking and learning from other countries, like for example the United States, and bringing that back into Europe, as a culture.
Adriano, particularly with your high-level reasoning processes, there's often the question of explainability, which comes up again and again, where customers are asking how a decision gets made. How do you approach those kind of questions?
Yeah. So that's a fundamental point, also connecting it to the question before, at why we decided to start Prometheux in Europe, because there's a incredible need for enterprise artificial intelligence to be trustworthy. And that's why at Prometheux, apart from using artificial intelligence, we actually research and develop systems that use symbolic techniques that are capable at processing information also deterministically. So we really believe in this future of neuro-symbolic artificial intelligence such that systems can be both intuitive and logic as humans are. So as Daniel Kahneman used to say, we think fast and slow, intuition and logic. And therefore, I truly believe that in enterprise artificial intelligence especially, there's a need to combine these two ways of kind of finding answers, both via deduction and via intuition, such that the end users can actually not only interpret results, but in certain cases, and in most cases at Prometheux, actually explain exactly how something has been deduced, deterministically. So if you execute it 1,000,000 times, it will be the exactly same result.
Do you find that that makes it easier for people to identify and replicate your algorithmic processes, or?
As in IP-wise,
Yes.
you mean? No, actually, it's very complicated, like the sort of technology we build. But no, I would say it's actually more complex to make something completely transparent, right? So I think there are several companies working in that direction. We believe our take is fundamentally different and unique and hopefully very hard to reproduce.
And with manufacturing and robotics, it seems like often these, I mean, we use the bracket term AI, but there are so many different kinds of algorithms that go into, and so many different sectors that go into this kind of product. So how do you get over those barriers to scaling and reassure investors that nothing will go wrong, there'll be no disruption?
Yeah, totally. So I think that's a blessing and a curse, right, as well, because it means there's an opportunity to add real value because all of these systems are coming together and these are really hard problems. And being able to make a car far more efficiently with less waste is far more impactful than spell checking someone's email with an LLM. But obviously it's harder. For us, I think the biggest barriers, are around the fact that you integrate with the real world. So we're there, building our own AI models. Everything seems great. And yesterday we were just at a factory in sort of Dorset, installing in a place where they make breathalyzers, very niche. And always the challenge is but the lighting is so bad, and there's one light that's been gaffer taped in a corner, and now the camera can't see properly, and you go, it doesn't matter how smart we can't deal with a gaffer taped light. So often it's around having control, I guess, of the environment in such a way that you can make sure your models behave, but then also when you're training your models, really testing them adversarially to make sure that you can handle gaffer-taped lights and whatever the users in messy factories will throw at you. But yeah, it's a challenging problem, but it means once you're in, you're super sticky, you've got a really great moat, and you can then improve from there because you're capturing data in that environment.
And I guess it's like you say, those hardest problems are the ones that are the most impactful to solve.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And they're also the most fun, and you get to see all these different weird factories and processes and how everything's made that you never actually think about. So
I guess if that's fun. Tommy, does this reflect the kind of barriers to scaling that you hear most from the founders of your companies?
Yeah, I think hardware is famously hard and therefore has scared venture investors repeatedly over the years. But hardware being hard also means that, as we've just heard, it creates barriers to entry that creates a lot of value. And if you look at the most successful venture outcomes in history, a lot of them are physical, right? Real world, whether it's NVIDIA, whether it's Amazon in a different way. So many examples, Tesla in our world of climate. And I think our job as an investor is to figure out what's the type of hardware which over time creates moats and crucially can attract capital to deal with a capital intensity problem, which is non-dilutive to the founders and us as investors. So can they go raise debt capital, for example? And then figuring out the category of hardware where it's kind of commoditized and it should be an infrastructure investment rather than a venture investment. And if I look at Climate Tech 2.0, why I think a lot of it has struggled, while there's a small patch which has done really well, it's the classic mistake that we saw in clean tech boom and bust years, which was infrastructure investments sort of masquerading as venture investments. And so I think we also see that in the AI world where a lot of venture dollars are now flowing into things like data centers, which are ultimately just about speed and capital efficiency, as opposed to any particular technology moat. And so I think you've got to know which type of hardware it is. But if you shun as an investor or founder hardware completely, I think you're saying goodbye to not all of the best returns, because clearly there are some amazing software companies, but a large chunk of the best ever venture returns are in hardware.
Something we heard this morning from a couple of investors was they mentioned the word AI bubble, which is a bit of a dreaded term that seems to be coming up more and more. I'm wondering if it's something that you guys deal with regularly, if it comes up in conversation, and whether you think it has any merit. Do you think that bubble is going to burst anytime soon? Tommy, maybe we'll start with you.
I think everyone's been figuring out what is the next great paradigm shift after mobile and after Web 2.0, and people thought it was AR and VR. Clearly wasn't, right? People thought it was blockchain. Apart from stablecoins, that's really proven not to be the case. I think clearly the next big paradigm shift is AI, right? And so it is going to create just absolutely enormous amounts of value for founders, for venture investors, for employees, for everyone. And so I think people are right to be thinking in that mode and to be kind of obsessive about it. But I also think just like the internet and Web 2.0, some of those early big investments are going to look really stupid. And if you look, for example, a lot of the LLMs, to me, they have a lot of the same characteristics as search engines did, right? And everyone thought it was going to be Alta Vista or Ask Jeeves and all of these ones, and they all went to zero. I think there's every chance that some of those big name LLMs will be worth zero, having been worth $100 billion or more. And there's probably some pretty bad investment decisions being made right now. Having said that, while we're more interested in applied AI, is whatever the paradigm is, whether it's mobile, whether it's Web 2.0, whether it's AI, if you can in a very concrete way create cost savings or extra revenue for your customers through whatever technology and do it in a profitable way, value will accrue to that, right? And I mean, both of these cases, that's what they're doing. And yes, they benefit from probably an AI bubble that makes people even more excited, but ultimately over the long term, it's going to be the profits that these companies generate which get people really excited.
What do you think, Adriano?
Yeah, I mean, I love companies that are very academically driven and that have a big component of research and development, such that they're not just kind of leveraging and applying models that are developed by others and using the hype just to create revenue in the short term, but not necessarily generational companies. And what really matters is using and building such technologies in such a way that you actually solve real problems, right? That's what, in the long term, what matters both to the customers, but to the world in general, is that if you're actually providing real value. So even if LLMs would not exist, I really love to think that we really bring value regardless to our customers, because we research and develop software that is able to process huge amounts of data, even with old-fashioned databases, even without a conversational interface. So I think that everything that is happening in AI is extremely valuable, regardless of how much hype there is today and how much there might be in the next years. And I love to think that with such an approach that is very academically driven, you actually develop something that is valuable regardless of whatever hype is around.
Yeah, just to add that as well, I think we're always talking about LLMs. It seems to me that being someone who's been in the AI world from the research side before it was cool, as it is now, we've just sort of collapsed this whole term of AI into just these large language models or multimodal models, where everyone is really excited about these opportunities because you can grow really fast and show some value very quickly, but exactly how sticky is that value going to be and how long term? The areas that I think excite me the most and will plow through the bubble are, in that sort of interface with the real world, whether it's for material discovery or for medicine or things like self-driving cars, robotics. All those areas don't get enough love, and I think that's changing at the moment, this year especially. And the LLM stuff, I imagine, is more the bubble that would collapse rather than the tangible AI.
That's really interesting. It's really hopeful. Particularly in Europe, there are so many of these massive incumbents, we don't even need to name them. Everyone can think of 4 names right now, when it comes to AI, both in hardware and software. And they just absorb every single startup that they seem to come across that they feel even slightly threatened by. What's it like trying to innovate in that landscape? And for Tommy, how do you advise founders in terms of differentiating themselves and making the most of being a startup in that kind of atmosphere?
I think two things. One is ideally don't sell to them too quickly, which would be a great shame. And we've seen that in Europe too often. Maybe we'll talk about that later. Secondly, I would say there is a really big opportunity with a different type of incumbent in Europe, which is the big industrial companies. And that, I think, is our huge opportunity here on the continent, is how do companies like these two team up with the big industrial giants in much more effective ways that make use of the strengths we have here in Europe, as opposed to always seeing that legacy industry as a negative. And so Douglas, for example, is teaming up with industry players across Europe to say, we can supercharge your transition to an AI world, which you guys know as corporates you're going to really struggle with, because they've got the talent and the speed to make it happen. And I think we need many more of those types of partnerships in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for us, being in manufacturing, it's not like we're worried about being acquired by the big players in the AI space, because their jam isn't manufacturing and industrial stuff. And most of the people we're working with are the people that actually run the factories, own the facilities, are in the supply chain, who don't have the in-house AI skills, et cetera, to build these models, to even know what is possible, right? So there's this big educational piece as well with what we can actually do with the techniques that are available today. And I think a lot of it is, how you approach that as a partnership of it's a win-win sort of situation for both players, really. We shouldn't be competing in any way.
Yeah, I mean, I truly believe also that it's fundamentally fundamental to find a specific niche from a technological perspective. So, like as Douglas said, like it's quite nice to work on something that these giants are not focusing on. In our case, is like using symbolic artificial intelligence to do big data processing, but it could be something completely different. So we're also seeing that by working with customers and partnering with very large enterprises in Europe, this works very nicely because they have the actual domain expertise to leverage your technology while you provide something that is quite unique to them and they wouldn't have the time and focus to actually create internally. So, yeah.
In terms of AI policy, what would you like to see? How would you like to see things change so that those barriers to scaling, whatever they are, can fall away and you guys can really surge ahead and maybe even compete with those big names? Tommy, what do you think that Europe and the UK in particular as an AI superpower needs to do?
Single biggest thing, I think, is forget this thing about trying to be the best place in the world at regulating AI and focus more on getting a grip on building the best AI. We've shown we can do it with DeepMind, right? And we just need to put, in my opinion, all of our policy focus on that. So there's no reason, for example, why we couldn't be world leading and being the most friendly with regulation on self-driving cars. There's no reason why we couldn't be doing many, many more things to make these guys' life more easy. And we're struggling even at the first hurdle where Apple can't release their products in the UK because we can't get our act together on modern regulation. So I think there's been this kind of weird further in London VC and London tech community, and it's bled into policy about we can be the best at regulating. That really is going to leave us in the dark ages if that's what we focus on.
100%. I mean, it's so bizarre. Yeah, let's actually. It's also the idea of like regulating the technology itself rather than the output product, right? Which is the thing that should be regulated in each of the verticals that you then apply AI to potentially. So yeah, focus on building AI. For us, I think, and for Europe in general, it's actually thinking as well about how the regulations in the industry you're applying AI to affect actually what AI can unlock. So as an example, in Germany, there's lots of data protection laws for workers such that you cannot, for us, tie that an error happened in the factory at this point in time and this worker was on shift when it happened, because you could then link that to who did it, which means we have to turn off features for actually reporting and logging where information is because of this weird regulatory loophole where you could actually make a process far more efficient if you're allowed to use all the information available. So thinking about how other ancillary regulations affect what you can actually deliver with your models, I think is another.
It would be a nice start in Germany to stop the situation where if you want to raise a seed round, you have to get the angels to read out 150 pages in front of a notary.
So true.
Yeah, I mean, my view is that I think it's fundamental for innovation to have very, very, very fast iterations, right? Especially with customers. So anything that can help have that sort of speed to onboard also enterprise and AI and startups, also with POCs or contracts that can be very, very quickly signed. That's what really matters. And we're seeing that there is willingness to buy and try artificial intelligence. It's just that it takes a very long time sometimes to get started.
Okay, if there are any policymakers in the room, we've heard them in. This is such a meaty topic, but I'm afraid that that's all we've got time for. So if you could give it up for Adriano, Douglas, and Tommy. Thank you very much.